Hello and welcome to another lesson on soundproofing. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the details in soundproof wall design that I'm sure a lot of you may not be aware of. And this is because we always tend to oversimplify the soundproof wall design, especially that double wall diagram that you're seeing here that's been shown a million times on the internet, gives you an SDC rating of 64, 2 layers of drywall on each side, easy peasy, no big deal, super simple. But like everything in soundproofing, it's not that simple if you want to get the maximum results from your design. So I'm going to go over that with you today. Before I jump in, I have a free soundproofing workshop. This is 45 minutes of in-depth teaching, going over everything I know about soundproofing so you guys can build the studio of your dreams. To watch that right away, just go to soundproofyourstudio.com/workshop. That is soundproofyourstudio.com/workshop. All right, let's jump into this lesson, all about soundproof wall details you maybe did not know about. All right, so I have a project of a client's project I recently finished, and I thought it was a great example of how the wall layers work. So first off, a lot of times we talk about drywall, but I actually like using 23/32 OSB sheathing. You could also use 3/4 inch plywood, which is pretty much the same material, but more expensive. So I use that as my main layer because it's roughly the same weight as 5/8 inch drywall. It's actually a little bit lighter and a little bit wider with 23/32. But that's my first layer. And you can see here, it's all butted up around the edge of the walls here. And this makes it really easy for you to hang acoustic panels, guitars, TVs, whatever it is you want to hang on the walls. You can just drill right into that plywood and it will hold a lot better than having to put a bunch of drywall sinkers in your wall, which also makes bigger holes and it's just a more difficult task. So I like to use plywood as my first layer these days, especially on the ceilings. Now you're going to notice that there's this crazy amount of staggering that's going on. And that is because you always install, and I like to do this myself, I always like to install my wall layers first and then my ceiling layer. So you're going to start with the first layer of your wall first, so the OSB sheathing on that wall, and then you're going to do the OSB sheathing on the ceiling. And it has to go in that order because for this staggered effect that you're seeing here to take place, you cannot do all the walls and then do the ceiling. You cannot do a bunch of layers on one wall and then another layer, a bunch of layers on another wall. That would not give you this staggered approach. And the reason for the staggered approach is imagine how hard it is for sound to get through all these seams. And this allows it, makes it so I don't have to caulk every single seam here. I just caulk the very last outside seam in the room here that we're looking at. So you'd run a bead of acoustic sealant all the way down here, and then you can mud and tape that drywall as usual, per normal. So this is a really great system. And then you'll also know that it's also tiered right here, like stadium seating. And the reason for that is that the ceiling actually comes in like that. So if we put the ceiling in, we can see our first layer of 23/32 just fit in like a glove against that. And the ceiling is hanging from these hush frame rafts on 1x3s. And it just so happens that that comes in just barely at the wall. So this is why I like to hang my wall first, and then my ceiling will butt up against the wall. You might be wondering, what the heck is this? And this, my friends, is something else that you might not know about, which is called a fire stop. And a fire stop is used to block fire, which could originate, these are metal studs, by the way, not wood studs in this design, block fire that could come up through my wall cavity and then enter into the ceiling cavity very quickly and without anyone even knowing inside the room that their entire room could be on fire inside the walls. So to block that, what I do is I have a special system known as a fire stop where I use a layer of usually 3-inch thermofiber, which is 3M thermofiber, or rock wool, which has a very, very high combustibility temperature. And so that means that fire will not easily catch on to the rock wool. It acts as a fire stop. The other thing that acts as a fire stop that is really not flammable at all is drywall. Drywall is essentially rock, and rock does not burn, just like rock wool. So this is a 1/2 inch layer of drywall that goes across over top of the rock wool. The rock wool gets compressed down to 1 inch, as you can see here. This is representing rock wool that's been compressed from 3 down to 1 inch. And I use screws every 48 inches on center, as few as possible, just to push that 1/2 inch drywall down into the top plate of my interior stud wall. And a lot of you might be freaking out saying, oh my God, you're connecting your system. And I'm like, it's just a couple screws. It's not gonna be the end of the world. And this gypsum board needs to bridge this gap and connect here. And then it's a good idea to use 3M fire caulk or some similar product along all these seams on this side as well, so that fire really cannot get out of the cavity here. In normal construction, it's not a problem. If there's a fire in one of the bays, it won't easily spread from one bay to the next because the bays are all sealed up and closed. So that is an important aspect of any soundproof double wall design. And I'm not sure if all of you are aware of that because it's never in any of the diagrams on the internet. So we've got our layering here. If we look at, let me see if I can get the drywall in here. So we'll add this drywall in, and you can see that it now layers, and I can actually go inside of here, and it's probably kind of confusing, but this shows inside of these layers. You can actually see the drywall layers, the 3 layers fitting perfectly into these stadium seating like layers here, and then it comes down. And so that happens all the way around. And all of that is really important for the installation method and the timing and the layering of your different panels. So this is why I think a lot of people simplify this and they don't even think through it, because it's like, why would you even think through this stuff in the first place? The last thing I want to talk about with these walls that I'm not sure you guys might be familiar with, which is something you may have seen in one of my other shots here, which is sway bracing. In this design, I opted to use the wick isolation clips. So if we just look right here, I'm going to take off some of the drywall here so you can just sort of see through the wall. And we can see that the walls in this design, this clip can hold up to 250 pounds. It's extremely sturdy. And so I've put these at the corners of both of my walls to hold the wall in place, because we do not want this wall attached to our ceiling. That's another big mistake I see a lot of contractors make, is that they just build an interior wall like they normally would, which if you attach it to the ceiling, your ceiling joist, which I'll throw in here just so you guys can see them, we can see our metal joists, and we don't want the metal joist to touch that space. So there's a big gap intentionally with how all this is laid out, so that there's no way that vibrations from the rest of the structure of this building will transfer down into this internal wall here. And then these wick isolation clips are purely for structure, but they're rated with this rubber material in here so that sound won't easily travel through the clip and into our wall. So sway bracing is something I've gone back and forth on, but I've come back around to it thinking it is very important and something I do in all my designs. Even though there might be a little bit more transmission by connecting walls, I think structurally it's super important to have your walls not be buckling left and right, especially with putting a lot of drywall. In this case, we're putting 4 layers of drywall on this project. So that is the basics of wall design. So let's review that real quick. First, you're going to stagger your layering of drywall, or in this case, even plywood, where you're going to do the first layer of drywall on the walls and then the first layer of drywall on the ceiling. Then start over, right again. And you're going to have that staggered approach if you do this correctly. And then you're also going to have each layer of drywall on the walls come down a little bit lower so that you can get that layer to go in across and create another staggered envelope so that sound cannot come through your ceiling or your walls as easily. Next, we talked about fire stops. Fire stops are super important in a double wall system, and even when you're using hush frame rafts, I like to use a little bit of rock wool in the top to make sure that fire can't spread to the ceiling. And then lastly, sway bracing. This is something that you may not have heard of, but sway bracing is super important around doors and then also for your walls. Depending on the clip, you might call the supplier and ask how often you need to place the clip. Generally, 48 inches on centers is pretty standard for most soundproofing sway bracing clips. The wick isolation clips might be an exception because they have such an incredibly high load bearing capacity. So you can talk with Mason Industries and figure out which clip is best for your project. All right, I hope this has been helpful and enlightening, and always letting you know that soundproofing always has layers like an onion, where it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. So again, if you're on this project and you're trying to figure out, if you're on this journey and you're trying to figure out how to soundproof your studio, how to acoustically treat your studio, definitely sign up for the free soundproofing workshop at soundproofyourstudio.com/workshop. And if you want to skip all of that and you're not trying to DIY it yourself, I also make my living as a professional studio designer and acoustician. I'm based out of here in Nashville. And if you need help designing your studio, definitely reach out on my website at soundproofyourstudio.com. Click on the Soundproof Clarity Call link, and you can fill out the application and have a call with me one-on-one, and we can talk more about your project. All right, I'll see you all next week with more information on soundproofing and room acoustics. Again, stay tuned. New videos every week. I'll see y'all later. Thanks so much for watching.